Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field.
Hey, have you ever been faced with the challenge of sourcing, installing, and programming a used control module in a vehicle? I know a lot of us have. It seems to be happening more and more often today with the volume of control modules on vehicles, the cost of some new ones, or even the availability of new control modules. In some cases, used may be the only option. So what do you do here? I strongly recommend checking out SJ Auto Solutions and Tommy Oliva. Tommy offers a cloning service for used control modules to make these things plug and play for the vehicle that you're working on. In a lot of cases, he is also able to source the control modules if you're unable to locate one for the vehicle that you're working on. But once you get connected with Tommy, he's going to offer fantastic support from start to finish to make sure that that control module is going to work in your application. He's also got tech support that he offers through his website, along with some free resources there as well on information about used control module programming. So make sure to check out SJ Auto Solutions. I can't recommend that enough. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping. I'll be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. This week on the show, just me, and I'm going to talk about a question that we get all the time running ST Mobile, doing the mobile thing. I also get a few emails and messages about it, but the listening audience is a pretty savvy crowd, and I'd say for the most part, you guys are able to figure this stuff out. There's not, too much of an issue, but every once in a while, and more on the second part of this episode, I do get questions about whether or not a module can be programmed to a car, or the more basic question that we get funneled into our business is, does this module need programming at all, right? So we're replacing a control module on a car, and obviously we do the programming. It's part of the service that we offer to our customers, and maybe you do it in your shop as well. And so when you're planning the replacement, you got two questions. Okay, number one, does it need to be programmed at all? And then, of course, if it does, how do I program it? But then in addition to that, and this is one of the more trickier questions that's a little bit more open-ended, is can I use a used module, a secondhand module, a module from another car, in place of the one that I'm taking out of the vehicle? And then again, if we're doing that, what's required? How do I do it? What do I need for that? And that does become a lot more trickier. And that's probably where I personally get more questions from the listeners of the show. And, sometimes we get a bunch of these from customers too. Sometimes I'll say, hey, I've never tried that. Maybe nobody's tried a used module in that particular scenario, especially if it's something that's relatively new. You might be the first one, or at least the first documented case of putting a used module in a particular application. So it does get a little bit trickier, but I'm going to start out with the basics here and how we handle it when we get calls in from somebody that says, hey, I'm replacing control module X on X vehicle. It's this year, it's this engine, this platform. We're replacing the module. First off, doesn't need programming. And then, more on our end, what are we going to need to actually program it, right? And I will say right off the bat, we've built up our own internal database, both with detailed documents that are stored in our drive, but then we also have like a spreadsheet reference that we can just quickly go to, say, okay, it's this year Ford Fusion replacing the body control module. Can we do used? If we're doing new, what do we need? What tool, what laptop? And that's more, specific to our exact application. But I'm going to go over a more broad perspective here of, hey, I'm replacing a control module. How do I quickly find out if there's other things that I need to do upon replacement. And of course, we try to train our customers, and it'd be nice if more of them kind of thought ahead to, oh, okay, I know that I'm going to be replacing this part, right? I've condemned X part. I know that it needs to be replaced. I should look up the procedure and see if anything extra needs to be done before I even order the part so they can quote it correctly. But a lot of the times what happens is, shops will just install a module and then they'll call us because, oh, it doesn't start, it's got codes, it doesn't do what it's supposed to, and yeah, it does need programming. Anyways, we get the call, so we want to be able to quickly look at the information that we have and figure out, okay, does this need to be programmed? Can it be programmed, right? Especially in a used scenario. And then if so, what do we need in order to do it? How are we going to do it? So we'll cover that. First things first, and again, the listeners of this show, you probably know this, so we'll go through it relatively quickly. But of course, the easiest way, shouldn't even say the easiest way, but the most consistent way across modules, across brands, to find out if a particular module needs any sort of programming or configuration or extra steps after you've replaced it is to go into whatever service information you're using, whether that be ALLDATA, Identifix, Mitchell, maybe factory information, and go to whatever module it is and just look up the R&R procedure, right? The remove and replace, the removal and installation procedure. And sometimes it actually does pay to look at both, right? Some service informations have the removal and the installation split into two processes. Sometimes it's one big long one, sometimes they're separate. And occasionally at the beginning of the removal process, it may tell you to hook up a scan tool and to pull data out of the existing one. And there's a number of control modules across brands that will have you take the data out of the existing module before you replace it with a new one. And just a couple quick examples on that where it's not impossible to get the programming done without doing this, but it becomes either more time consuming or more difficult if you don't have the original plugged in first. And Ford is the biggest example of that. And number one, to be able to get the coding or the as-built data out of the original module can save you time. Now, sometimes you can just pull it off the server and you're good, but there have been a ton of examples that we've experienced with ABS modules and instrument clusters on like the 2010-ish range Ford vehicles where the as-built data on the server is wrong. And so if you just go to do it with a new module plugged in, it'll pull data from the server, but it won't work. You need to get it off the old one, or at least have access to a similar vehicle to get that as-built data, which is the coding, essentially. And, I said the older range, but now that I'm thinking about it, new vehicles have that problem too. We had I think it was a 2019 Ranger. We've had Ford Transit issues where the data on the server is wrong, and you got to go through a whole process to get that changed if you don't have the original data. But again, going to my point there is like there may be a step in the removal process that you may want to pay attention to that has something to do with the programming. But here's the other thing. It will clue you into, oh, hey, this does have some sort of programming to it. And then you can go to the bottom of the installation, and usually somewhere in the last few steps of the installation of the module, it will tell you either what to do for programming or give you a link to go to another place to read up on the specific programming. So that's just the all-around big blanket statement of how do you find out if a module needs to be programmed at all. Take a look at service information, look at the R&R procedure, go to the bottom of the installation, and does it tell you to do anything programming wise or setup wise or configuration wise, and then you go and you read that process. Now, I will say this is not 100% accurate or doesn't include every single module in every single car. We have run into examples out there where if you go into the service information, it does not say anything about programming, but if you install it on the car and you don't program it, you're going to have issues. That thing's not going to work. There's going to be warning lights. We just had a Jeep Cherokee, I think it was a Trailhawk, where somebody put a rack in it. And we were pretty sure that it did need programming, but we looked at the service information And it doesn't say anything about programming with the R&R procedure. Well, the customer replaced the rack, and of course it did need programming. So every once in a while you are going to run into things in service information where maybe it doesn't include everything you need. European stuff is definitely that way, where they've pushed so much of the information into their factory tooling that if you're looking at an ALLDATA or an Identifix, you may not have much information at all on what you're supposed to be doing with the replacement of a module. So there is some caveats to it, but again, generally speaking, that's the easiest way to find out of, do I need to do any sort of post setup for this control module? Now, the other thing I wanted to share here, and this hopefully is a tip for you that speeds things up and gets you more accurate information quicker. I'm going to go over the big three for domestic stuff in the US. So GM, Ford, Chrysler, or Stellantis. And I'll give you some shortcuts to search for when you're using aftermarket service information to find a chart of what needs to be programmed on what module, or if it needs to be programmed. Okay, and then also Nissan. And the reason I'm doing the big three and Nissan is those are our most commonly requested modules to be programmed. And I was just looking at 2025 numbers, and it went GM, Ford, Chrysler, Nissan in that order of modules that we program. So obviously it's the most common one that we're going to be looking it up the most, and that might be the case for you too. There are probably shortcuts for other makes and models. I just didn't have those at the ready, but I'm going to share with you what I've got for those. So what I'm saying here is, if you go into service information, and this could be Identifix, it could be ALLDATA, probably Mitchell, MotoLogic. I don't use those two, so I can't say for sure, but I know within ALLDATA or Identifix, if you use these search terms, as soon as you go into the service info and build the vehicle, it will get you to a chart that's going to be very helpful. So I'll give you the exact terms here, so you can write these down if you want to, so that you can remember them for each brand. But I'll start with GM. So if you go into service information and you build your vehicle, whatever it is, your General Motors vehicle, let's say it's the 2016 Chevy Colorado. All right, and you could obviously just go to the module, like I said, do the R&R process and go to the bottom and see, does it have anything? Or here's the other thing that you can do for a quick reference. And this is pretty much any GM that has module programming. I'm sure there's exceptions, but for the stuff that we're working on every day, 2008-ish to 2020, that's our main range of vehicles. This applies for all GMs. If you type in control module references, okay, so again, that's control module references on a GM vehicle, it is going to bring you to a chart that is going to show you it's going to give you the alphanumeric code for the module. So if you've ever looked at the programming software or wiring diagrams for GM, they assign control modules with an alphanumeric code, right? So it'd be like A11 or K29 or K71. There's lots of Ks that refer to modules. T sometimes is used. Anyways, it's an alphanumeric code. It tells you what the module is, right? You can click on the schematic for that system or that component as well. There's a repair instruction link, and then there is a programming and setup link on this chart. So basically, you just go down the chart, or you can control F, find your module, and in the chart that says programming and setup, you can click on it and it will bring you right to everything that needs to be done for that control module when it is replaced. And then you can also click on the schematics and the repair procedure if you want. Right, it's just a quick reference for everything that needs to be programmed on the vehicle. I shouldn't say any control module that's on the vehicle, but anything that's going to require programming, generally speaking, is on this list. So again, that's control module references. Search that, and it's just a quick setup for module programming on General Motors. Okay, so now Fords, and I have found this is about 2010-ish and up, will utilize this. So it's not on some older stuff. You may have to, dig and find that manually, right? And you can use the search function within the service information just to search your particular module, and you can probably find it. But again, I like these charts because it includes everything on the car, and it's just a nice, quick, easy reference. And, if you're just operating on, you're going into the service information over and over and over again, it's nice just to be able to refer to one place and say, okay, I know how this chart works. I know what's going to be on here, and here you go. So for Ford, when you're in the search tab, search module configuration. Okay. And this is going to bring you to a chart that talks about the programming. So if you read the first few, this show is brought to you by Automotive Seminars. If you're looking to stay up on the cutting edge diagnostic strategies and techniques, this is the place. You've got live 4-hour seminars that are put online that you can join in, ask questions, interact with the instructors with some of the best of the best. They've got Keith Perkins and John Thornton putting on classes like network diagnostics, mechanical engine testing, advanced electrical testing, and GDI diagnostics, and a ton more. And once you purchase one of these training seminars, you can access this at any time that you want through your account at automotiveseminars.com. You can rewatch the training a year, 2 years later, which makes this training even more valuable. So I highly recommend you check this out. The link is in the show notes. Paragraphs on it. It's good information, but it's about programming and how Ford works and as-built data and, the vid block. What is that? Adaptive learning. But if you continue down on the page, you'll find another chart, much like the control module references for GM. It's going to break it down by module, gives you the module address. It says if it requires a PMI, which is Ford's Programmable Module Installation. It tells you if it's reprogram capable. Okay, so not all Ford modules can be updated with new software, but some can. This will give you a yes, no. It will tell you if it requires any adaptive learning or calibration, which would be after the PMI. And it tells you if there's anything you can change in programmable parameters, which is, custom settings, customer preferences, things like that. And it breaks it down by module. And it is really helpful to get an overview of all the modules on the car. And then if you keep going down, it'll give you some errors that you might come up with in relationship to programming and what they mean. Again, helpful stuff if those pop up. Usually, thing that it tells you to do is just says do a PMI for just about all these errors. But it does tell you, what does it mean when I have a VIN mismatch code? And it'll tell you the modules that can set it and tell you what you're supposed to do to fix it. Right? If it will or not, it's another question, but that's on there. The first chart is probably the most helpful, but again, that's module configuration for Ford. Okay, moving on to Chrysler. Now, I haven't found a chart exactly like the last two that I talked about for Chrysler. You kind of have to just go to the module and look at the procedure to find what's necessary. And like I mentioned, that Jeep that I was referring to didn't have anything about programming, or at least I missed it if it did. But what Chrysler has is it's a different type of chart. It has to do with modules that contain any sort of role within the immobilizer system, right? So this is RF hub, BCM, PCM, the keys themselves, anything that has something to do with the immobilizer on the vehicle. If you look up programming order guide, that's the search term that you would use, is programming order guide. It's going to include all of the modules that have something to do with the immobilizer system, and it will tell you the order in which you perform the steps after they're replaced. And it gives you a chart of which module are you replacing and which modules are still existing on the vehicle, right? So it'll say condition 1, you're replacing the RF hub, but the body control, the keys, and the PCM are staying on the vehicle. Okay, same thing for the BCM, same thing for the keys, same thing for the PCM. And for each one, it's going to have you do different steps depending on the module that's replacing. But here's the other really helpful part. And if you get into module programming where multiple things are being replaced at one time, which does happen, this chart will walk you through what steps need to be done if I'm replacing both the RF hub and the BCM at the same time, but I have existing keys and PCM. Or I'm replacing the RF hub and the keys at the same time, but the BCM and the PCM are staying on the vehicle, right? So all the different combinations of what could happen are on here, and the steps in order that you're supposed to do for these are all on this chart. So again, that's programming order guide if you're looking at a Stellantis vehicle and replacing anything specifically with the immobilizer system. If it's just a control module, you'll probably have to search that particular module and see. Okay, finally, Nissan. Nissan doesn't have a chart either that I've found, but what Nissan has is if you search additional service and then the acronym of the module you're replacing, so ECM, BCM, TCM, additional service is going to bring you to the steps that need to be performed after the module is physically replaced. All right. Now, Nissan's another one where you need to pay attention because there are certain applications, certain modules where it really benefits you to pull the configuration data off of the existing module if possible before going into the new one. So that is one thing where the additional service usually starts after you've replaced it, but you may want to look at the whole process to see if it requests you to pull configuration data on the original, right? And so for us doing mobile service, that's important to know so that we can tell the shop, hey, leave the original plugged in, or we need access to the original in order to plug it in to do our process. Going back to Ford, like if you replace a PCM, you want that information. So number one, you don't have to search the vehicle options and enter them manually, like tire size and axle ratio and all that stuff. But also the solenoid strategy is stored in powertrain control modules on Fords. Now, can we get that off the tag on the transmission? Hopefully it's legible. But if you don't grab it off the original, then you have to type it in manually. If you perform the PMI properly, where it inhales off of the existing module and then exhales into the new one, it'll transfer all of that and it'll save you time, right? So if you're looking to increase your efficiency in module programming as well, these are the sort of things to pay attention to, where the inhale can be very beneficial. Now, there's times in certain situations, maybe you don't want to do that. If you're you can get into a lot of different situations as you program more and more, but generally speaking, it's very helpful to have the original plugged in first on some of these vehicles. Now, GMs, you don't really need to do that as far as I'm aware. Now, I still like having the original module, but there's no like inhale function for GMs that transfers over to the new module, except for like, I'm sure there's oddball ones out there that have to do with like key remote information I'm thinking of and stuff like that. But generally speaking, General Motors, you don't have to do that. Okay. So that's the general process that we're going to use to find out if a module needs to be programmed at all, right? Or is there something that we have to do? And, there's some modules that don't need any programming. They are just plug and play. And quite often they're modules that are less mission critical. But as time goes on, more and more things at least need some sort of scan tool function or setup or calibration, even if it's not a, official programming of the module. We're not changing the software. Maybe we're not even coding it, but we're doing some sort of setup. And in that case, okay, could the shop handle it? Potentially. It depends on their capabilities and their tooling that they have. But that's where we're going to find this information for a new one. So that's the first step of this. Where this gets more tricky, more confusing, there's more variables and nuances to consider, is if we're doing a used control module. And again, this is more of the questions that I get from some of the listeners and friends, and obviously the people that we're doing work for is, hey, I'm going to try to do a used control module in this application. Again, doesn't need programming. And then if it does, can we do it and how do we do it? And this is where documenting some of our processes has been really helpful because then we have a quick chart to say, yes, we've attempted a used module in this application and it does work. Here's what you do. Maybe it's no different than the programming and setup for a new module. That's totally possible. It might just go through with the factory software and the factory process. Maybe there's additional things that we have to do. Maybe there's even less steps than we would normally have to do, right? If they're able to get a control module for a particular vehicle that already has the correct software for that setup, now they have to match vehicle options and all that stuff, then we may not have to do a whole lot. Maybe a VIN change, right? Maybe just some sort of quick learn or setup for that particular application, but it really depends on the car and how they have that network and module configuration set up on that particular vehicle. And there's tons and tons and tons of different setups and modules and networks and things that cars will allow to happen with used modules or not, right? So again, there's no chart within factory service information, at least not that I've found, that is going to give you the, hey, you can use the used module here, you can't use a used module here. A lot of times, if you find anything in the service information referencing in this, it's just going to say you have to do a new one. Like a new is required. And a lot of times you ask the dealer, that's going to be their stance as well. Understandably so, if they're warranting stuff, they're going to want to put new stuff in. And maybe that's your attitude at your shop too, is like, why would I put something used in there? I have to warranty it. I totally get that. Where we come from a lot of the time is both availability and cost, right? Now, the cost piece of it, kind of depends on the scenario, but in some cases, the cost difference between a used and a new is absolutely crazy. I was just quoting out a radio for Volkswagen Tiguan or Touareg or something like that, and the new radio for this thing, and this car is 10 plus years old, was like $2,700, right? The car is maybe worth that. And you could get a used one for, it's still $300-$400. It's not exactly a cheap radio, but like that's the amount of money that we're talking about sometimes, where used makes a lot more sense. But then the question becomes, can we do that? Is it possible to put a used control module in this application? And in that case, we can, as long as they get the right one. And that's our biggest thing when we talk to people about used control modules. Is I'm like, yes, we can do it, or maybe we can't. But like in this application, we know we can do this radio, but you have to match the part numbers exactly. And we tell people to match the part numbers exactly. Here's the thing, just, real talk about programming. It doesn't always have to be exact. You could have a different part number. Maybe it's a super session. Maybe there's just more than one hardware application that will work in that particular case, and it'll take the software in the car and it'll work just fine. But my problem is when I'm looking at this from like, hey, what works and what doesn't, I don't have a chart, and I don't think there is a chart of every wrong application that will work in a particular vehicle, right? So there's no chart out there that says, yes, this is the wrong part number for this car, but it'll still work. That's just not a thing. So we're rolling the dice. If you're getting something that is not the same hardware, we don't know if it will work or not. And that's what we tell our customers too. Now, you can use some websites, and car-part.com is actually really, really helpful here. You can go on, and I will say it's not 100%. It's not 100. There's errors within there. Like you get some stuff and it says it'll work, it doesn't work. But for the most part, it's actually pretty useful to figure out if a particular module will work in a specific application. Again, not 100%, but it gets you pretty close a lot of the time. And I'd say their accuracy is pretty good. Their database is pretty good. I was talking to Neil, I don't know, it's probably over a year ago I had him on the podcast, but he owns a junkyard out in Boston, and he was telling me about the system that they use to develop, when you go into car-part.com and you're building your vehicle options, and then it's having you select certain things about the control module, that this is a database on like that side of things, that world of the automotive, where, they've done their homework and it's actually pretty good. So I'll use that sometimes to help me figure out, as a control module from this particular vehicle, like, right, maybe we're putting it in, module in an '09 and it came out of an '08, and maybe it's a different part number. I'm like, I don't know if it'll work, but I will use CarDash parts sometimes to help me figure that out. Okay, now, of course, you can use RepairLink Shop as well, and you can figure out what is the factory part number, the new part number, and that can help you identify whether, like, a lot of times when we get to a car, the part's already been replaced. Maybe they don't even have the original anymore because the car came to them that way. And so now I have to try to figure out, like, is this even the right part number at all? Because I don't have the original in front of me. That's where RepairLink will help out. And you can, if you're having issues programming, you can at least say, hey, this is not the right part. I don't know if it's going to work or not. It doesn't seem to be. It may be a hardware issue. Here's the correct part number. You're going to have to find one of those. So obviously getting the right module is step one, and that can be harder than you think. And again, some of these used part scenarios, I mentioned the cost of it, but some of it's availability too. And it could be a little both, right? There's certain modules that are just unobtainium. You can't find them. They don't make them new, and everybody's, swooped up the used ones already, like 05-ish Cummins engine controllers. Good luck. There might be some used ones out there, but they're multiple thousands of dollars to get them. So there's certain applications where it is really tough. We went through, it was an older Mercedes trying to do an all activity module, and they're out there, but man, finding one in good shape is almost impossible. The dealer can't get them. That was actually how we got involved with it. So the dealer couldn't get a new one. We tried a couple of used ones. They all ended up having the same problem, or the one that didn't have the problem was the wrong part number. So it was a hassle, right? So anyways, sometimes we've got to go the used route, again, because you can't even get a new one. And so, okay, you find the correct used module. And again, the question is, can we make this happen? Now, that's where, I could talk for hours and hours, because there are so many different applications, combinations, and, differences in the scenarios and the programming equipment and what's required to make something work. And that's where we have, kind of created our own internal database on, can we use a used module in this application? And we haven't tried everything, right? Again, there's probably a million different combinations of different things, probably more than that. And luckily we can kind of batch things. We can group things. We can say this year Ford, yeah, you could pretty much do used anything. Or this year GM, okay, these control modules don't matter, but these control modules do. We can do used in this case. We can't do used in this case, right? And so you can kind of come up with a feel for a particular vehicle application. But even within that, you can run into a scenario where, hey, a used module is just not going to work in this case for whatever reason, right? Maybe it's the immobilizer portion of it. Maybe it's the VIN or the programming portion of it is not going to change. And again, that can depend on, did you get the correct module or not? But a lot of times what we run into is the VIN number or the immobilizer portion not matching up with the vehicle. So then it's, can we do this with a factory tooling? Do we have to do board work to make this happen? And then if that's the case, is it even, possible to do it board work? And right. And you've heard me talk on the show a ton about, taking classes and learning about the module cloning and all the aftermarket tools. But it gets really tricky here because, again, there's no database. I don't have an all data for like used module programming. I'm going to be doing some searching, whether that be, Google, YouTube, Facebook groups, diag.net, utilizing, AI large language models to help me search all of those resources very quickly. And of course, documenting and referencing our internal database. Maybe reaching out to some friends too. That's another option, because maybe, so-and-so has done it. And so he can tell you, yeah, it works fine. You can do a used ABS in this Volvo. It's no problem. Vito will program it and you're good to go, right? So where I'm going with that is if you're getting into the module programming side of things, you may have to say to a customer, well, we don't know if we can do used or not, but we're going to try and see what happens. And then once you do, you can start building that database of like, hey, this module works in this application, this module doesn't work. And then if you find a module that doesn't work in a particular application, is it because it just can't be done? Or is it because some more advanced techniques, procedures, or tooling is going to be required to make it happen? And then the next question is like, is it worth it for what we're doing here, right? Like, how many requests am I getting for this particular used module that I can't make work? And what can I realistically charge for making it happen, right? And that's a worthwhile question to ask, because we've run into some scenarios where there are no other options and this car is going to the scrapyard if we're not able to make this used module work. We had a BCM in an old GM vehicle. There are no new ones. You can't get them, but you can get a used one, right? And the regular GM programming does not work for used modules on these particular applications. Board work, turns out, it's not exactly the easiest thing to do for this particular module, but you can make it work, and then that vehicle is back on the road, right? So then that becomes really worth it to know how to do that. Now, how many of those old GMs are we going to be getting calls on? Hard to say, but I've got it well documented now, so the next time that does come around, we can say, yes, we can do it, but we're charging a premium price for it. Because I already know that there's a number of other people that aren't able to do it. This particular application, he's like, yeah, we've tried a few other people. They weren't able to make this happen. And they were very happy to pay a premium price for someone who could. So that's kind of where you can, find your advantage in the marketplace, maybe, is if there is something that has a demand that there's not a whole lot of other options for, then you can invest the time, the effort, the resources into learning, can I do this? What's required? How do I do it? Okay, now I've got a service that I can offer a premium for. So that's kind of where we take a lot of the used ones, is we look at the vehicle, we look at the options. Is it just somebody that's trying to spend as little money as possible? Or is it somebody that has zero other options? Or this car is going to the scrapyard, and so they're trying to make this option work. And those are the ones that I more gravitate to, like, let's try and figure this out. Let's be the service that can make this happen, right? We don't always need to be the hero necessarily in every situation. Some of them are better to move on from, but I think it's worthwhile to investigate. So anyways, that's going to be where I wrap this up for questions on module programming. Hopefully that was helpful and somewhat of a decent resource for you if you're getting into this or you're seeing more of this. But I'd like to thank everybody out there for listening, and let's all get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.